They say kindness is a virtue that costs nothing. But for Chiara, a young mother in Rome, it was about to cost her everything. Or so she thought. Her story doesn't begin in a grand cathedral or a holy shrine, but in a place you might never expect to find a miracle. Under the fluorescent lights of a McDonald's just after midnight, the air hung thick with the smell of old French fries and cleaning solution. Chiara's feet ached with a deep familiar pain as she pushed a wet mop across the checkered floor. Every swipe, every circle was one step closer to home, to her daughter Sophia. Just the thought of her little girl's smile gave her the strength to wipe down one more sticky table. Sophia was her world, her reason for working these double shifts until her bones felt like they might crumble. The doctors had used long, complicated words, but the meaning was simple. Sophia needed a treatment, a very expensive treatment that Chiara's paycheck could barely begin to cover. But hope, like the faint scent of coffee still in the air, kept her going. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Closing time. She had just locked the glass doors when a gentle knock made her jump. Through the door she saw an old man. He was hunched slightly, leaning on a simple wooden cane, his clothes humble and his face etched with the kind of weariness that soap and water couldn't wash away. He looked lost and hungry. Immediately the voice of her manager, Signor Rossi, echoed in her head. "The rules are the rules, Chiara. The doors lock at 12. No exceptions. It is a matter of policy, of security." Signor Rossi lived by the clock in the corporate handbook. He was not a cruel man, but he believed that rules kept the world from falling into chaos. And breaking them was the one sin he would not forgive. Her job, the very job she needed for Sophia, was on the line. She looked from the locked door back to the old man's tired eyes. In them, she saw the face of her own father in his final years. She saw the quiet plea of every person who has ever felt invisible and overlooked. What good are rules, she thought, if they make us forget to be human? With a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs, she turned the key. The lock clicked, a sound that felt both like a betrayal and a prayer. She opened the door just wide enough for him to enter. "We are closed, Father," she said softly, using the respectful term for an older man. "But you cannot stand out there. Come in, please." A grateful smile touched his lips. "Thank you, my child. God bless you." She led him to a small table in the corner and disappeared behind the counter. The food warmers were off, and most everything had been put away. But there was a burger and a small carton of fries set aside, destined for the trash bin. She warmed them up, poured him a cup of hot coffee, and brought it to his table on a clean tray. "It is not much," she said, feeling a little embarrassed. "It is a feast," he replied, his voice warm and steady. He looked at her, his gaze clear and kind. "You have a good heart. It is a heavy burden to carry a good heart in a hard world." Chiara felt tears prick her eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. "I just do what I can," she whispered. She thought of Sophia, asleep in their tiny apartment, and knew she would do it again, no matter the cost. "But before we dive in, tell me where you're watching us from, and may God bless you wherever you are. Now let's begin." The sun rose over Rome the next morning, a glorious splash of gold and pink against the ancient domes. But for Chiara, a cold shadow was already beginning to fall. She walked to work with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, praying that Signor Rossi wouldn't notice the few minutes of recorded time after the official closing. She told herself it was a small thing, a simple act of kindness. Surely God would understand, and maybe, just maybe, her boss would too. She had barely stepped through the employee entrance when his voice cut through the morning chatter. "Chiara, my office, now!" The usual warmth in the break room vanished. Her co-workers avoided her eyes, suddenly very busy with their lockers. Signor Rossi's office was a small, windowless room, dominated by the glow of a computer monitor. And on that screen, frozen in grainy black and white, was the image of her handing the tray to the old man. He didn't raise his voice. He simply pointed to the timestamp in the corner of the screen, 12:07. 7 minutes, Chiara. 7 minutes you left the door unlocked. 7 minutes where anything could have happened. And you gave away company property. Signor Rossi, he was just an old man, she pleaded, her voice trembling. He was hungry. The food was only going to be thrown away. It is not about the food, he interrupted, his voice flat and final. It is about the principle, the rules. They are not suggestions, Chiara. They are there to protect the business, to protect the employees. What if he had not been a harmless old man? What if he had a weapon? But he didn't. I cannot have employees who decide for themselves which rules to follow. He sighed, a sound of genuine but firm regret. I'm sorry. I have to let you go. Please leave your uniform on the counter. The words hit her like a physical blow, fired just like that. The hope for Sophia's treatment, the fragile security she had fought so hard for, all of it dissolved under the cold, unblinking eye of the security camera. Numbly, she unbuttoned the familiar uniform, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. She walked out without looking back, the smell of burgers and fries now feeling like the scent of failure. Back in her tiny apartment, the silence was deafening. She looked at a picture of Sophia on the wall, her daughter's bright, innocent smile, a painful reminder of everything she had just lost. How could she tell her? How could she explain that her own act of compassion had stolen their future? She fell to her knees beside her bed, the worn floorboards cold against her skin, and she finally let the tears come. She didn't pray for her job back. She didn't ask for money. She just prayed for guidance. Lord, she whispered to the empty room, her voice choked with sobs. I don't understand why this happened, but I trust you. Please, just show me the way. It was in that moment of complete surrender that the telephone rang. The sharp, sudden sound made her flinch. She wiped her eyes and answered, expecting it to be a neighbor or perhaps a call from Sophia's school. But the voice on the other end was not familiar. It was a man, his voice calm, formal, and carrying an air of quiet authority. Am I speaking with Signora Chiara Russo? He asked. Yes, she managed to say. My name is Father Antonio, the man continued. I am calling from the Secretariat of State at the Vatican. Your presence has been requested for a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with a senior aide to the Holy Father. Chiara gripped the phone, her mind reeling. The Vatican? A meeting? It made no sense. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. I think you have the wrong person, she stammered. No, Signora, the voice replied patiently. We have the right person. Will you be able to attend? Hanging up the phone, she felt a strange mix of terror and a tiny, flickering flame of hope. She had prayed for a sign, for a path to be shown. But she never, in her wildest dreams, imagined it would lead to the very heart of the Vatican. Walking through St. Peter's Square the next morning felt like stepping into another world. Chiara clutched her worn handbag, her knuckles white. She had chosen her best dress, the simple one she wore to church on Easter, but surrounded by the breathtaking majesty of the Vatican, she felt as small and plain as a sparrow. The air here was different, quiet and heavy, with centuries of prayer and history. It was a world away from the frantic rush and sizzling fryers of McDonald's. For a moment, she felt a wave of panic. What was she doing here? She, a fired fast food worker summoned to the holiest place in Christendom. It felt like a dream, and she was terrified of waking up. A stoic Swiss guard, his uniform a brilliant splash of color against the ancient stone, directed her to a side entrance she had never noticed before. Inside, the cool, quiet halls echoed with her nervous footsteps. She was met by the same Father Antonio who had called her. He was a kind-faced man who seemed to sense her unease. Do not be anxious, Signora, he said with a reassuring smile. Please come this way. He led her not to a busy, formal office, but down a quiet corridor to a small, private waiting room. The room was simple but elegant, with a single painting of the Madonna and Child on the wall. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the constant beeping and ringing that had been the soundtrack of her life. She sat on the edge of a velvet chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her mind racing. Perhaps it was a mistake after all. Maybe they were looking for another Chiara Russo. After what felt like an eternity, the heavy wooden door opened. Chiara's heart leaped into her throat. She stood quickly, ready to meet the senior aide, to explain the misunderstanding. But the man who entered was not a stern-faced Monsignor in clerical robes. It was him, the old man from the restaurant. He was dressed differently in a simple white cassock, but the face was the same. The same kind eyes, the same gentle lines of weariness and wisdom. The same wooden cane was in his hand. For a moment, Chiara was utterly frozen, her mind unable to connect the humble, hungry stranger from last night with this serene figure standing before her in the heart of the Vatican. She could only stare, speechless. He closed the door softly behind him, and the quiet room seemed to hold its breath. He walked slowly towards her, and a gentle smile touched his lips. A smile that seemed to understand all of her confusion and fear. "Chiara," he said, and his voice was the same warm, steady voice she remembered from the night before. "Thank you for your kindness. I must confess, a hamburger has never tasted so much like true compassion." He stopped just a few feet from her, his gaze full of a profound and gentle authority. "My child," he continued, "I believe we have not been properly introduced. I am Leo." He paused, letting the name settle in the sacred silence of the room. "Pope Leo XIV." Chiara felt the world spin. Her legs grew weak, and she instinctively reached for the chair behind her to steady herself. The old man she had given a leftover meal to, the man she had broken the rules for, the man who had cost her the job she so desperately needed, was the Holy Father himself, the shepherd of 1 billion souls. And in that moment, as she looked into his smiling eyes, she realized her life was about to change forever. Chiara felt a blush of shame creep up her neck. She tried to stammer an apology, to kneel, to make some gesture of respect for the man standing before her, but her body wouldn't obey. Pope Leo simply raised a hand, his expression one of gentle patience. No, my child, please sit. There is nothing to apologize for. You treated a hungry old man with dignity. There is no higher honor than that." He sat in the chair opposite her, placing his simple cane beside him. He looked less like the Supreme Pontiff and more like a grandfather about to share a story. "I must explain," he began. "From time to time I leave these walls, not as a pope, but as a simple pilgrim. My advisors bring me reports, stacks of paper, telling me about the state of the city, the struggles of the people. But paper has no soul. I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to find God where he truly lives. Not just in our beautiful basilicas, but in the crowded streets, the lonely alleyways. And yes, even in a McDonald's at midnight." He leaned forward, his voice filled with a quiet sorrow. "I have visited soup kitchens where the hungry are treated like numbers. I've seen charity administered with cold efficiency, where the rules have become more important than the people they were meant to serve. I was beginning to fear that we, as a church, were forgetting the heart of Christ's message." His gaze met hers, and she saw a flicker of light return to his eyes. "And then," he said, "I met you. In the most ordinary of places, you performed an extraordinary act of faith. You did not know who I was. I was no one of importance. Yet you risked your livelihood, the very means to care for your daughter, to show mercy to a stranger. Chiara, your small act of kindness in that restaurant was a more powerful sermon than many I have heard in St. Peter's. It was the gospel, brought to life." Chiara could only listen, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and disbelief. "That is why I have brought you here," the Pope continued, his voice now filled with purpose. "I am creating a new initiative, a special fund that will answer directly to me. Its mission will be to cut through all the red tape, all the bureaucracy, and deliver help directly to those who need it most. No lengthy forms, no cold waiting rooms. Just a helping hand, offered with love." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle in the quiet room. "I do not need another administrator with a fancy degree to run it. I have plenty of those. I need someone with a heart that understands, someone who knows what it is to worry about rent, to pray for a sick child, to feel the weight of the world on their shoulders and still choose kindness." He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I want you, Chiara, to be its first director. We will call it the Shepherd's Embrace." 3 months in which Chiara's life was transformed. The weary exhaustion of long nights at McDonald's was replaced by a different kind of tiredness, the satisfying ache that comes from a day spent lifting the burdens of others. The Shepherd's Embrace was a resounding success. Under her guidance, it became a beacon of hope in Rome. She met with families, listened to their stories, and ensured that help arrived not in weeks or months, but in days. She never forgot what it felt like to be on the other side of the desk, and she treated every person who came to her with the dignity and respect she had once shown to a disguised pope. Sophia was thriving. The best doctors, funded by the foundation, had started a new treatment, and the color was returning to her cheeks. Her laughter, once a fragile sound, now filled their new, slightly larger apartment. For the first time, Chiara felt the sweet relief of security. She felt safe. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the feeling vanished. As director, she had insisted on reviewing all the foundation's financial records herself. She wanted to understand every detail. At first, everything seemed perfect. Donations came in and aid went out. But then she noticed something odd. Several very large donations, all listed as anonymous, seemed to have no clear origin. They appeared in the ledger, but the corresponding bank records were vague, almost intentionally obscure. When she traced the funds, she found they moved through several accounts before landing with the foundation. It was the kind of complicated path designed to hide something. A cold knot formed in her stomach. It could be nothing, a simple matter of a private donor wishing to remain unseen. But it felt wrong. It felt unsteady. It looked like the kind of financial mess that, if discovered by the press, could erupt into a terrible scandal. A papal foundation mishandling money? The thought was horrifying. Her first instinct was fear, pure cold fear. She thought of Signor Rossi's office, of the shame of being fired, of the terror of having no way to care for Sophia. She had this new life, this beautiful, miraculous life, and she could lose it all. Again. The temptation to close the ledger, to pretend she hadn't seen it, was overwhelming. Who would know? She could just ignore it. Or maybe she could try to fix the records herself quietly, without telling anyone. After all, wasn't it better to protect the good work of the foundation than to risk its destruction over some confusing paperwork? If the foundation fell, hundreds of people, including her own daughter, would fall with it. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful courtyard. She saw a group of children playing, one of whom she recognized, a little boy whose family she had helped keep from eviction just last week. He was laughing, carefree, and in that moment she knew what she had to do. The Pope had not chosen her to be clever or to be a shrewd manager who could hide problems. He had chosen her for her heart, and her heart told her that a house built on a shaky foundation, no matter how beautiful, is destined to collapse. The Shepherd's Embrace had to be built on the rock of absolute truth, not the shifting sands of fear and deception. To do anything less would be a betrayal of every person she had helped, and a betrayal of the man who had trusted her. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she walked back to her desk and picked up the phone to call Father Antonio. "Father," she said, her voice clear and firm, all traces of fear gone. "I need to request an urgent and private meeting with the Holy Father. It is a matter of the utmost importance." The quiet waiting room felt colder this time. Chiara sat on the edge of the velvet chair, a thin folder resting on her lap. It contained all her findings, the strange donations, the confusing bank transfers, the questions that had kept her awake for the past 2 nights. She wasn't just nervous anymore. She was heartbroken. She felt like she was about to destroy the most beautiful thing that had ever happened to her. But she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that she was doing the right thing. The heavy door opened, and Pope Leo XIV entered, just as he had before. He smiled at her, but Chiara was too filled with dread to return it. "Chiara, my child," he said, his voice as gentle as ever. "Father Antonio said your matter was urgent. Please, what troubles you?" She stood, her hands trembling as she held out the folder. "Holy Father," she began, her voice shaking slightly but clear. "There are problems with the Foundation's finances." She walked him through it, her finger tracing the lines of numbers on the pages. She explained what she had found, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she laid out the facts. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply presented the truth as she had found it. "I do not know what this means," she concluded, finally looking up from the papers to meet his gaze. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I know that revealing this could cause a great scandal. It could destroy the foundation and all the good it does. It could cost me my position, Holy Father, and I know what that means for my Sophia." She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to stand tall. "But I also know that this work, of all work, must be built on truth. We cannot help the poor with money that is not clean. I would rather go back to mopping floors with a clear conscience than be the director of a foundation built on a lie. Even if it costs me everything, the truth must be the foundation of all we do," she finished, her heart pounding in the suffocating silence of the room. She had done it. She had risked it all. She waited for his reaction, disappointment, anger, perhaps even dismissal. Pope Leo was silent for a long moment. He looked down at the folder in his hands, then back up at Chiara's tear-streaked, defiant face. And then, to her utter astonishment, a slow, wide smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pride. "Thank you, Chiara," he said, his voice filled with a warmth that seemed to push the cold from the room. He closed the folder and set it aside on the table as if it were a matter of no importance at all. "There are no mismanaged funds," he said gently. "There is no scandal about to break. The discrepancies you found, they were placed there intentionally, by me and by my most trusted secretary." Chiara stared at him, her mind unable to process his words. A test?" she stammered. "A final one," he affirmed, his eyes twinkling. "My child, I already knew you had the heart of a servant. I saw it that night in the restaurant. But I had to be certain, absolutely certain, that you also had the unwavering integrity of a leader. I had to know if you would protect the truth, even when it might cost you dearly. Charity without honesty, Chiara, is a body without a soul. It is a hollow gesture." He stood and walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Today, you have proven that your integrity is as strong as your compassion. You have proven that you are worthy of this sacred trust. The test is over, and you, my dear Chiara, have shown that you are everything I prayed I would find." He smiled. "Now the real work can begin." 1 year later, a joyful crowd gathered on a familiar street corner in Rome. But the building they faced was new. Where the bright, impersonal lights of the McDonald's once shone, there now stood a beautiful 3-story building of warm brick and welcoming glass. A simple, elegant sign hung above the door, Casa di Sofia, Sophia's house. It was the first of many community centers built by the Shepherd's Embrace, offering food, shelter, and medical aid to any who needed it. On a small stage set up for the grand opening, Chiara stood at the podium. She was no longer the tired, anxious woman who once mopped these floors. She was a leader, her voice calm and filled with a quiet strength that resonated across the crowd. Beside her, holding her hand, was Sophia, healthy, vibrant, and smiling, the living embodiment of the foundation's purpose. In the front row of the crowd stood Signor Rossi. He was no longer in a manager's uniform, but in a simple volunteer's vest. He had been the first to offer his help when construction began, his face etched with a humility that had replaced his rigid adherence to rules. He looked up at Chiara, his eyes filled with a profound respect. Chiara looked out at the faces before her, families she had helped, children who were now healthy, and friends she had made. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the afternoon sun, "I stood on this very spot, feeling lost and afraid. I believed that an act of kindness had cost me everything. Today I stand here and I know the truth. The greatest miracles don't always come with a thunderclap from heaven. Sometimes they begin quietly. Sometimes a miracle looks like a warm meal served after midnight to a hungry stranger." A gentle murmur went through the crowd. "We are taught to look for God in grand cathedrals and on hallowed ground," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the new building. But I have learned that his compassion can be found everywhere. It can be found in the courage of a mother fighting for her child. It can be found in the hands of a volunteer serving soup. And yes, it can even be found in a fast food restaurant in the middle of the night. This house, Sophia's house, is not just a building. It is a promise. It is a promise that we will always see the person, not the policy. That we will always choose compassion over convenience. As the crowd applauded, Chiara's eyes were drawn to a simple balcony on a building across the square. An old man stood there, leaning on a familiar wooden cane, watching the celebration. He was not dressed in the white of a pope, but in the simple, dark clothes of a priest. He caught her eye and he smiled, giving a slow, proud nod. It was a silent blessing, a shepherd content to see his flock caring for one another. The truth was, there had never really been a test at all. There was only life, presenting its daily choice between what is easy and what is right. Chiara had been faced with that choice, and she had answered with an open heart. That was the real victory. That was the real miracle. It was a miracle that began not with a prayer for herself, but with a simple act of charity for another. And in doing so, she had discovered that in the shepherd's embrace, the one being held is never just the person in need, but also the one who is brave enough to reach out a helping hand.